Chapter 15. In total darkness, Catherine Solomon groped for the outer door of her lab. Finding it, she heaved open the lead-lined door and hurried into the small entry room. The journey across the void had taken only 90 minutes, and yet her heart was pounding wildly. After 3 years, you'd think I'd be used to that. Catherine always felt relieved to escape the blackness of Pod 5 and step into this clean, well-lit space. The cube was a massive, windowless box. Every inch of the interior walls and ceiling was covered with a stiff mesh of titanium-coated lead fiber, giving the impression of a large cage built inside a cement enclosure. Dividers of frosted plexiglass separated the space into different compartments: a laboratory, a control room, a mechanical room, a bathroom, and a small research library. Catherine strode briskly into the main lab. The bright and sterile work space glistened with advanced quantitative equipment, paired electroencephalographs, a femtosecond comb, a magneto-optical trap, and quantum indeterminate electronic noise (REGs), more simply known as random events generators. Despite noetic science's use of cutting-edge technologies, the discoveries themselves were far more mystical than the cold, high-tech machines that were producing them. The stuff of magic and myth was fast becoming reality as the shocking new data poured in, all of it supporting the basic ideology of noetic science, the untapped potential of the human mind. The overall thesis was simple: we have barely scratched the surface of our mental and spiritual capabilities. Experiments at facilities like the Institute of Noetic Sciences, or IONS, in California and Princeton Engineering and Anomalies Research Lab, or PEER, had categorically proven that human thought, if properly focused, had the ability to affect and change physical mass. Their experiments were no spoon-bending parlor tricks, but rather highly controlled inquiries that all produced the same extraordinary result. Our thoughts actually interacted with the physical world, whether or not we knew it, affecting change all the way down to the subatomic realm. Uh, wow, that's pretty interesting. Our thoughts actually interacted with the physical world, whether we know it or not, affecting the change all the way down to the subatomic realm. Okay, mind over matter. In 2001, in 2001, oh man, okay. In 2001, in the hours following the horrifying effects of September the 11th, the field of noetic science made a quantum leap forward. Four scientists discovered that as the frightened world came together and focused in shared grief on the single tragedy. Oh man, so I'm just going to read that part again. In 2001, in the hours following the horrific events of September 11th, the field of noetic science made a quantum leap forward. Four scientists discovered that the frightened world came together and focused in shared grief on the single tragedy. The outputs of 37 different random event generators around the world suddenly became significantly less random. Somehow, the oneness of the shared experience, the coalescing of millions of minds had affected the randomizing functions of these machines, organizing their outputs and bringing order from chaos. The shocking discovery, it seemed, paralleled the ancient spiritual belief in a cosmic consciousness, a vast coalescing of human intention that was actually capable of interacting with physical matter. Recently, studies in mass meditation and prayer had produced similar results in random event generators, fueling the claim that human conscious, as Noetic's author Lynn McTaggart described it, was a substance outside the confines of the body. Okay. A highly ordered energy capable of changing the physical world. Catherine had been fascinated by McTaggart's book, The Intention Experiment, and her global web-based study, theintentionexperiment.com, aimed at discovering how human intention could affect the world. A handful of other progressive texts had also piqued Catherine's interest. From this foundation, Catherine Solomon's research had vaulted forward, proving that focused thought could affect literally anything: the growth rate of plants, the direction that fish swam in a bowl, the manner in which cells divided a petri dish, the synchronization of separately automated systems, and the chemical reactions in one's own body. From the crystalline structure of a or even the crystalline structure of a newly forming solid was rendered mutable by one's mind. Catherine had created beautifully symmetric ice crystals by sending loving thoughts to a glass of water as it froze. Incredibly, the converse was also true. When she sent negative, polluting thoughts into the water, the ice crystals froze in chaotic fractured forms. Human thought can literally transform the physical world. As Catherine's experiment grew bolder, her results became more astonishing. Her work in this lab had proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that mind over matter was not just some new age self-help mantra. The mind had the ability to alter the state of the matter itself, and more importantly, the mind had the power to encourage the physical world to move in a specific direction. We are masters of our own universe. At the subatomic level, Catherine had shown that particles themselves came in and out of existence, uh, based solely on her intention to observe them. In a sense, her desire to see a particle manifested that particle. Heisenberg had hinted at this reality decades ago, and now it had become a fundamental principle of noetic science. In the words of Lynette McTaggart, living consciousness somehow is the influence that turns the possibility of something into something real. The most essential ingredient in creating our universe is the consciousness that observes it. The most astonishing aspect of Catherine's work, however, had been the realization that the mind's ability to affect the physical world could be augmented through practice. Intention was a learned skill. Like meditation, harnessing the true power of thought required practice. I'll just go to read that part again. The most important aspect of Catherine's work, however, had been the realization that the mind's ability to affect the physical world could be augmented through practice. The mind's ability to affect the physical world. Intention was a learned skill. Like meditation, harnessing the true power of thought required practice. More important, some people were born more skilled at it than others. And throughout history, there had been those few who had become true masters. This is the missing link between modern science and ancient mysticism. Catherine had learned this from her brother, Peter, and now, as her thought turned back to reality, she felt a deepened concern. She walked to the lab's research library and peered in, empty. The library was a small reading room, 2 Morris chairs, a wooden table, 2 floor lamps, and a wall of mahogany bookshelves that held some 500 books. Catherine and Peter had pulled their favorite texts here, writings in everything from particle physics to ancient mysticism. Their collection had grown into a eclectic fusion of new and old, from cutting edge and historical. Most of Catherine's books bore the titles like Quantum Consciousness, The New Physics, The Principles of Neural Science. Her brothers bore older more esoteric titles like the Kybalion, the Zohar, the Dancing Wu Li Masters, and translation of the Sumerian tablets from the British Museum. The key to our scientific future, her brother often said, is hiding in our past. A lifelong scholar of history, science, and mysticism, Peter had been the first to encourage Catherine to boost her university science education with an understanding of early Hermetic philosophy. She had been only 19 years old when Peter sparked interest in the link between modern science and ancient mysticism. So tell me, Kate, her brother had asked while she was home on vacation during her sophomore year at Yale, what are Alice reading? What are Alice reading these days in theoretical physics? Catherine had stood in her family's book-filled library and recited her demanding reading list. Impressive, her brother replied. Einstein, Bohr, and Hawking are modern geniuses. But are you reading anything older? Catherine scratched her head. You mean like Newton? He smiled. Keep going. At 27, Peter had already made a name for himself in the academic world, and he and Catherine had grown to savor this kind of playful, intellectual sparring. Older than Newton? Catherine's head was now filled with distant names like Ptolemy, Pythagoras, and Hermes Trismegistus. What the hell? Nobody reads that stuff anymore. Her brother ran a finger down the long shelf of cracked leather bindings and old dusty tomes. The scientific wisdom of the ancients was staggering. Modern physics is only now beginning to comprehend it all. Peter, she said, you already told me that the Egyptians understood levers and pulleys long before Newton, and that the early alchemists did work on par with modern chemistry. But so what? Today's physics deal with concepts that would have been unimaginable to the ancients. Like what? Well, like the entanglement theory for one. Subatomic research had now proven categorically that all matter was interconnected, intertangled with a single unified mesh, a kind of universal oneness. You're telling me that the ancients sat around discussing entanglement theory? Absolutely, Peter said, pushing his long dark bangs out of his eyes. Entanglement was at the core of primeval beliefs. Its names are as old as history itself. Dharmakaya, Tao, Brahman. In fact, man's oldest spiritual quest was to perceive his own entanglement, to sense his own interconnection with all things. He has always wanted to become one with the universe, to achieve the state of at one moment. Her brother raised his eyebrows. To this day, Jews and Christians still strive for atonement, although most of us had forgotten it is actually at one merit we are seeking. Well, I'm just going to read that part again. Absolutely, Peter said, pushing his long dark bangs out of his eyes. Entanglement was at the core of primeval beliefs. Its names are as old as history itself. Daka, Baba, Tao, and Barman. In fact, man's oldest spiritual quest was to perceive his own entanglement, to sense his own interconnection with all things. He had always wanted to become one with the universe, to achieve the state of at one at-one-ment. Her brother raised his eyebrows. To this day, Jews and Christians still survive or still strive for atonement, although most of us had forgotten it is actually at-one-ment we are seeking. So basically, Jews and Christians are seeking for at-one-ment, not atonement. Interesting. Okay, Catherine sighed, having forgotten how hard it was to argue with a man so well versed in history. Okay, but you're talking in generalities. I'm talking specific physics. Then be specific. His eyes challenged her now. Okay, how about something as simple as polarity, the positive-negative balance of the subatomic realm? Obviously, the ancients didn't understand. Hang on, her brother pulled down a large dusty text which had dropped loudly on the library table. Modern polarity is nothing but the dual world described by Akashima here in the Bhagavad Gita over 2,000 years ago. A dozen other books in here, including Kybalion, talk about binary systems and the opposing forces in nature. Catherine was skeptical. Okay, but if we talk about modern discoveries in subatomics, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, for example, then we must look here, Peter said, striding down his long bookshelf and pulled out another text. The sacred Hindu Vedantic scriptures known as the Upanishads. He dropped the tome heavily on the first. Heisenberg and Schrödinger studied this text and credited it with helping them formulate some of their theories. The showdown continued for several minutes, and the stack of dusty books on the desk grew taller and taller. Finally, Catherine threw up her hands in frustration. Okay, you made your point, but I want to study cutting-edge theoretical physics, the future of science. I really doubt Krishna or Vyasa had much to say about string or superstring theory and multidimensional cosmological models. You're right, they didn't, her brother paused. A smile crossed his lips. If you're talking superstring theory, he wandered over to the bookshelf yet again. Then you're talking about this book here. He heaved out a colossal leather-bound book and dropped it with a crash onto the desk. 19th century translation of original medieval Aramaic. Superstring theory in the 13th century? Catherine wasn't buying it. Come on. Superstring theory was a brand new cosmological model based on the most recent scientific observations. It suggested the multidimensional universe was made up not of 3, but rather 10 dimensions, which all interacted like vibrating strings, similar to resonating violin strings. Catherine waited as her brother heaved open the book, ran through the ornately printed table of contents, and then flipped to a spot near the beginning of the book. Read this, he pointed to a fading page of text and diagrams. Dutifully, Catherine studied the page. The translation was old-fashioned and very hard to read, but to her utter amazement, the text and drawings clearly outlined the exact same universe heralded by modern science. Heralded by modern superstring theory, a 10-dimensional universe of resonated strings. As she continued reading, she suddenly gasped and recoiled. Oh my god. My god, it even describes how 6 of the dimensions are entangled and act as one. She took a frightened step backwards. What is this book? Her brother grinned. Something I'm hoping you'll read one day. He flipped back to the title page, where an ornately printed plate bore 3 words, The Complete Zohar. Although Catherine had never read the Zohar, she knew it was the fundamental text of early Jewish mysticism. and believed so potent that it was reserved only for the most erudite, erudite rabbis. Catherine eyed the book. You're saying the early mystics knew their universe had 10 dimensions? Absolutely. He mentioned to the page's illustration of 10 intertwined circles called Sephiroth. Sephiroth, like the Final Fantasy 7. Sephiroth. Obviously, the nomenclature is oh man, esoteric, but the physics is very advanced. Catherine didn't know how to respond, but then why don't more people study this? Her brother smiled. They will. I don't understand. Catherine, we have been born into wonderful times. A change is coming. Human beings are poised on the threshold of a new age when they will begin turning their eyes back to nature and to the old ways, back to the ideas in books like the Zohar and other ancient texts from around the world. Powerful truth has its own gravity and eventually pulls people back to it. There will come a day when modern science begins in earnest to study the wisdom of the ancients. That will be the day that mankind begins to find answers to the big questions that still elude him. That night, Catherine eagerly began reading her brother's ancient texts and quickly came to understand that he was right. The ancients possessed profound scientific wisdom. Today's science was not so much making discoveries as it was making rediscoveries. Mankind, it seemed, had once grasped at the true nature of the universe, but had let go and forgotten. Modern physics can help us remember. This quest had become Catherine's mission in life, to use advanced science to rediscover the lost wisdoms of the ancients. It was more than academic thrill that kept her motivated. Beneath it all was a conviction that the world needed this understanding, now more than ever. At the rear of the lab, Catherine saw her brother's white lab coat hanging on its hook, along with her own. Reflectively, she pulled out her phone to check for messages. Nothing. A voice echoed again in her memory. That which your brother believes is hidden in DC, it can be found. Sometimes a legend that endures for centuries endures for a reason. No, Catherine said aloud. It can't be real. Something a legend was just that, a legend.